Okay, so ready to dive deep.
Let's do it.
Today, we're tackling something I think everyone struggles with at some point. You know that feeling? Not being good enough, like you're carrying around all this guilt and shame.
Oh, yeah. That inner critic can be brutal.
Exactly. And we're exploring this using a sermon called No More Condemnation When You Are in Christ. It's by Apostle John Isaias Moore. But don't worry, this isn't just about religion, even though we are using a religious text as a jumping off point. We're going to dig into some seriously useful insights about how we all treat ourselves, no matter what you believe.
Right. This sermon really resonated with me because it starts with something we all experience, that feeling of falling short. Whether it's our own goals, expectations from others, or like the sermon says, maybe even some kind of divine standard, it just grabs you. It's a deeply human thing.
Yeah, that condemnation thing the sermon talks about, it really does feel universal. It describes it as this guilt and shame from not meeting God's standards. But don't we do that to ourselves all the time, even outside of religion? We set these like impossible standards and then just beat ourselves up when we don't reach them.
Exactly. And it's so interesting how the sermon presents a solution, right? It talks about being in Christ.
Yeah. What does that even mean? It sounds kind of exclusive, to be honest.
I get that. It can sound that way at first, but if you look deeper, I think it's more about a state of being, kind of a mental shift you make, like aligning yourself with a force for good, a force for self-improvement.
Interesting.
And honestly, you can find parallels in secular philosophies too, like mindfulness or positive psychology.
Okay, that makes sense. So this sermon keeps repeating that in Christ, there's no condemnation. So is it saying that believing in Jesus just wipes your slate clean? Does it really work that easily?
I totally understand the skepticism. It's a bold claim. But what if we think about it in terms of atonement, the idea that someone else can take responsibility for the actions of others? It's a powerful idea that we see playing out in so many ways. You know, parents taking the blame for their kids, friends sticking up for each other, even in restorative justice practices.
Yeah.
It's acknowledging that we're all connected and that sometimes it's okay to step up and help each other carry the weight.
Okay, so less guilt, more freedom. That sounds great in theory. But how do we actually live that out, like day to day? If we aren't focused on the religious aspect of this, what does this freedom look like in practice?
Well, this is where the sermon gets even more interesting. It uses this metaphor of adoption. You're adopted into the state of no condemnation. So imagine, what kind of parent would you be to yourself?
Oh, that's a good question.
Would you be constantly criticizing yourself, picking apart every mistake? Or would you be supportive, encouraging growth, celebrating the effort, even when things don't work out?
The second one, definitely.
Right. And that's the shift this sermon is pointing to self-acceptance. It's about silencing that inner critic we all have.
That's a really powerful image. So practically speaking, what does this kind of self-parenting actually look like?
It starts with noticing that inner critic when it starts to get loud. Challenge those negative thoughts. Ask yourself, is this thought actually helping me grow, or is it just bringing me down?
Right.
And then instead of condemnation, try offering yourself the kind of support you'd give to someone you love. Celebrate your small wins, forgive yourself for messing up, and just keep focusing on learning and growing.
I love that. So even if you're not religious, that core message, that freedom from beating yourself up, it's so powerful.
Totally.
And it all begins with recognizing where those feelings come from and then choosing to take a different path, a more loving path.
Absolutely. And I think even if someone doesn't subscribe to the whole religious aspect of this sermon, there's still undeniable value in learning to be more compassionate with ourselves.
Couldn't agree more.
We have to actively challenge that inner voice of condemnation and ask ourselves, is this actually helping me become a better person?
So true. And to come back to that adoption idea, here's a thought for everyone listening. If you were truly parenting yourself, like you were your own child, what kind of encouragement would you offer yourself instead of all that negative self-talk?
That's a great question to sit with.
Something to ponder. Till next time.
See you then. Okay, so ready to dive deep.